Two Amazon procurement nerds are back. We've also added a new form in our show notes. So if you have a topic that you'd like us to discuss on a future show or a question or comment about a previous show, feel free to check out that form and drop us a note. That way, we're getting a lot of inbounds coming in, which is awesome, but we want to make sure we're a little bit more organized in gathering and collecting all of our feedback. So, Dr. Elouise, I had a girlfriend, I think it was like 2 weeks ago now, send me 2 new pieces of Gartner content that I sent over to you. And this triggered you and I think enough where we should probably chat about this and kind of dedicate an episode to our thoughts on working with analysts. The 2 pieces of content in particular that we were sent and are kind of talking about is the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 for 2024. And then the second piece of content is their Chief Supply Chain Officer Leadership Vision 2024, 3 strategic actions for success. So why don't we, Dr. Elouise, I know you and I both have some strong opinions around working with. So let's have you maybe open up with just some of your thoughts. And then I actually have run analyst programs and inherited some contracts that I would actually like to talk about and share my perspective.
Yeah, I think this is going to be another episode where we agree because our perspectives are aligned. Because I I I think the analyst structure is broken. I think it's wrong. I think it's I mean, and this is just a cynical view, but it just seems like it's pay to play. And so when I read those reports and absolutely everyone that gets posted online, I just sort of groan and roll my eyes because maybe not, and that maybe hashtag not all analysts, but most of them are pay to play, and I think it skews the market. And I'm more of a purist, and I think this also bleeds over into research and a lot of the research, and we talk about that later. But it just feels like so much of this is pay to play. And so at least for me, when I read this stuff, I just look at it as a lens of who's paying for this.
Yeah, so I have run analyst programs at a couple procure tech firms. Now, keep in mind, my background is primarily with startups, so I'm sharing this from a perspective of a smaller organization. And at one of the firms that I worked at and was running go-to-market, I inherited a multi-year Gartner contract. So this
Cool.
was not something that I was involved with negotiating. So I want to be very clear that I am not the one who put this in place, but it's something that I inherited and was responsible for executing. And if I recall, I want to say it was something like a 3-year contract, which in my mind is very, very expensive for a Series A or Series B company. And it was about $120,000 a year.
Oy. Ugh.
And my first cringe moment was looking at the price tag and looking at our spend, meaning what was our marketing budget for the year, and realizing that a pretty big chunk of it was going to Gartner
Yep.
instead of all the other things that I feel that we could have been doing to invest in building out a solid go-to-market strategy and building out a pipeline that's generating qualified inbounds. So what I noticed is there was a lot of selling from the Gartner team throughout all of the conversations, even when we're just having a touch base or a check-in. I felt like there was always an underlying incentive from Gartner to continue to upsell, sell us more. And then, 8 months before the contract renewal, it was full blown wolves are on us trying to get contract renewals going and a contract renewal in place. So I didn't like that feel. It kind of felt cringy and gross to me that we're a customer paying what I consider to be quite a bit of money. And the entire time I felt like there was a sales pitch and an underlying motive versus really trying to help us.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets to like it feels like it's a conflict of interest. And I'm not saying analysts can't make money, but if you're selling to the people you're evaluating, there's an implicit bias and conflict of interest there. And I have the same issue with consulting firms that have quote unquote partnerships with the companies of the technology that they sell.
So the price point was an issue, the constant selling was an issue. I think another thing that's really important for those of you that are listening, that are working with a smaller procure tech firm, and you've got a very, so what I would consider small or modest budget that you're working with, really, really think twice about, is investing with an analyst firm the right way to spend that money? And one of the things that's really important to look at is, who are Gartner's clients? So in the case of the firm that I was working with, we were selling into the mid-market. Gartner does not work with mid-market customers. So if we did get our name mentioned or an inbound from Gartner, it was a client that we couldn't even service because they were in the enterprise space, most often 3-5 billion plus in revenue, and we were targeting firms in the 250 million to 1 billion revenue range. So you just need to have full awareness that if partnering with an analyst firm is part of your pipeline lead gen strategy, which I don't recommend, by the way. I think there's a lot more creative, innovative things that you can do to build pipeline. But if that is something you're considering, you need to look at, who are the analyst customers, and are those companies that even make sense for you to work with? Can you service them? And are they people that would be good customers for you?
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I work with the clients that use these reports, and it's not just Gartner, it's Forrester and the others. Even the clients recognize the weakness of these reports. They just do it to check the box, because some leader somewhere says, "Well, did you check fill in the blank, Gartner, whomever, for their insight?" And I think many of the things we've talked about, and this dovetails back to the conferences. Why are we spending money on these conferences? And when your lead generation can be so much better organically or in other venues, and I think it's true for analysts. The other thing, just sort of to keep in mind, is oftentimes the analyst frameworks are wrong. And for the longest time, that Gartner only focused on procure to pay. They just moved that out to source to pay. But the reality is that that's not even the right construct anymore. We've moved on beyond that. And then what happens, especially for early stage tech companies, is if you don't fit into their paradigm, which by definition many startups are outside the core paradigm, then you're not even getting a look from Gartner, and so you're just paying to be on a list of somebody to watch. And that's why I'm really bullish on like Glance at Procure Tech, where he does the 100 and he does other things that are not pay to play. They're just research and so forth.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, so I've worked on the indirect side and on the direct side. I will also say that analyst coverage in the direct space is very, very poor. So you look at a firm like Forrester or Gartner, there is almost no coverage at all in the different graphics that they produce, their quadrants. It's almost 100% on the indirect side. I will say, I know that Patrick, for example, at IDC, is somebody who has publicly spoken about this, even as an analyst, that he doesn't know why the direct has gotten almost no coverage at all. And that's something he's kind of been on a mission on, which I appreciate. because the direct is a very, very important part of our space. And if we're going to have a holistic view about what's happening in supply chain, we can't ignore direct. So again, if you are a procure tech innovator on the direct side, why would you spend all this money with an analyst to then not even get coverage in the big reports and graphics that they produce?
And also when you mentioned analysts, there's also we've been picking on the big firms here for a minute, but also there are individual call them quote unquote influencers that charge ridiculous amounts of money to be an influencer and to drive traffic and I mean like six figures and and as we talked about in a couple episodes ago, like people, I don't charge anything. I don't take money from anybody to promote people on the spider chart. I am genuinely showing the innovation and so there's zero money there and I'll talk to anybody and my door is always open and I charge nothing. And like I said, I reverse the paradigm and I always offer to help these startups for free, nothing, no money, never. And and so to know that influencers, quote unquote, are out there taking money or extorting money just drives me bananas.
Yeah. So I wanna talk about these couple pieces of Gartner content that I was sent. And then there was a post done by an analyst firm that I want to specifically call out and talk about a little bit. I found it on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago. So the first piece of content is the Gartner Supply Chain Top 25 for 2024. This is in my mind. Again, I've never been on the practitioner side of the industry, always on the go-to-market side, but I have to assume that these 25 firms are spending a pretty significant amount of money with Gartner from advisory and consulting practices. In this report, there are 10 of them that have specific callouts that actually get dedicated content and have a dedicated paragraph. So I assume that those 10 are even spending more money to get some additional coverage. But in my mind, after reading through this, and if anybody wants a copy of it, ping me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to send it over. I don't see anything groundbreaking in here where I would say, wow, I need to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this information. I'll call out Dr. Elouise, the macro trends that they call out for these top firms that they're featuring this year. The first is attract and engage talent. The second is AI-driven advances, and the third is anti-fragile supply chains.
I mean, seriously, like, okay, I'm losing my composure here and have already used one colorful piece of language. I mean, come on, really? I mean, like AI and talent and what is anti-fragile really means resiliency. I mean, like, do we not know this already? I mean, like all the conferences this year. I mean, what was it? ISM just had their conference and it was all about AI. And like, you can't open up LinkedIn without these topics being top of mind.
Every event that I have been to or seen the content produced as a result, it has been AI focused this year. So if you can't go and get your own content or tune into something virtually, I think we have a greater problem with the leadership team if that is a top trend that is needed to be gained from working with an analyst.
Right. And this gets to the like this now I'm getting worked up. This gets to the issue of okay, so you're telling me what the problems are. Yeah, well, we all know what the problems are. The question is how do you solve this? And this is a lot of where my research sits is like how do you address the talent problem and the different generational problem and so on and so forth. Not like I don't nobody cares about what is happening. We all know that. We all live it.
So, and then, within every page in the report at the bottom is an upsell to spend more money with Gartner. Also signing up for their newsletter, following them on LinkedIn, becoming a client, and then downloading materials, often of which is gated. So again, you have to become a paying customer or pay for the content. And then at the very end is the, of course, upsell, connect with us, become a Gartner customer. We're going to provide you these really valuable tools. So that's the first piece, which again, just mind blown that those are the three groundbreaking takeaways.
Well, and this also gets to, sorry, like this gets to a point about forget what the analysts do. The reality is, as practitioners, we have upskilled significantly. And now that we are armed with AI, do we even need analysts? Because a lot of this data is publicly available. And so we actually may not, maybe we may have gone to the point where analysts are no longer the value add. And by the way, this is true for consulting too. So like these are threats to, these are more existential threats to these old business models. So I just want to plant that seed out there too.
Yeah, I actually just attended a webinar this week. There's been quite a few updates to Google's algorithm because of the advancements of AI and AI pulling data and information versus referencing articles from people's websites, which is how a lot of organizations run their SEO strategies and drive traffic. And so the whole webinar was around how is this going to impact SEO? And are some more of the old school resources even going to be relevant now when Google has in their search results at the top? You'll often, if you go on and just Google something, you'll see it's flagged as the AI response or the AI information that's coming in at the top. So again, to your point, with AI and all the changes happening and how people get information, is working with an analyst even relevant?
Yeah, and I suspect we're going to find pretty quickly that it's not. By the way, just SEO is search engine optimization for those that aren't aware.
Yes, you are correct. I'm the woman who always says don't use acronyms, and then there I go. So thank you for calling that out. All right, so the other Gartner report, which is the Chief Supply Chain Officer Leadership Vision, I just wanted to share. This is a 6-page document, which is a big part of it is the upsell to work with Gartner and try to get more business. Their mind-blowing, groundbreaking takeaways from this is maximizing future supply chain productivity, creating value from uncertainty, and closing the digital to reality gap. Again, I just look at this and see there is nothing in here that is going to actually give me useful information as a leader that I can go back to my team and make strategic decisions that are going to impact our bottom line.
So first of all, those 3 headlines didn't even make any sense. But again, if they made sense, so what? So what, like that means nothing. It's how do we solve these problems? And like whatever that first one was really saying, just be more efficient in your operations. Well, like we've been on that journey for decades. So like we're just rehashing the past.
Yeah, and it was specifically said again, maximizing future supply chain productivity.
Yeah, that's not the future supply chain remit. We've been doing that. All right, now I'm really getting worked up. We've the goal is how do we like what's the balance between third parties and in-house? What's the balancing of nearshore, offshore, friendshore, all these other things? And these are things that are already in progress. So if you really want an insightful report, it's got to be something way more compelling than that stuff.
Yeah, and I think again to your point, instead of telling me, show me, give me real life examples, give me stories, give me before, current, and future state. Show me how I can actually take action and make change versus just calling out some buzzword headlines, you know, for the hundreds of thousands of dollars that these organizations are spending with these firms.
And I'm still stuck on that one from the previous article, anti-fragile supply chain. I mean, come on, like what it's building resilient supply chains, and that like I spent a lot of time debunking like the resiliency myth. So like let's just like enough with the nonsense.
So a friend of the show, and I've actually worked with their team for a while. Jason Bush, who is the CEO and founder of Spend Matters. They are, I guess you could say, an analyst firm in some sense, more mid-market focused, more technology innovation focused. He did a post, looks like about 2 weeks ago. And Dr. Elouise, I'd like to get your feedback and take on it. I read it as kind of a dig on Kearney a little bit. And in my mind immediately goes to, this is something pay to play. And there's something behind this content and the reason that this was published and written the way it was. So I'm just going to call out a couple things from the post for those listeners who haven't yet seen it. It says, has Officio passed Kearney in procurement? And for those who don't know, Officio is I don't know if mid-size is fair to say. How would you describe them?
I just think they're. I'm not even sure that, like, yeah, I don't know what the designation, but they're a procurement consultancy. I think it's fair to say. I mean, obviously.
Okay. So the post goes on to say Officio, which has grown quietly, is now hit 1,200 consultants. So the point here is that they've been growing pretty steadily behind the scenes. And then there's a breakdown of some of where their different revenue is coming in. And then at the bottom, it says, let's be conservative and say Kearney is on the low end of this. So 650,000, and Officio is about 500,000 K in revenue per consultant. This tells us that both businesses have a north of about a 500 million in annual revenue in procurement and sourcing, and Officio has a slight edge. So the purpose of this is Officio now a strong contender or somebody who's even passing Kearney in the supply chain consulting space? Would like to just have you, Dr. Elouise, kind of unpack this for us.
Yeah, so a few things. So one, I'm a big fan of Jason Bush, and I remember talking to him. I think he started in 2004. Like in 2004 or five, I remember having a conversation with him, and I was like, "How are you doing this? How are you making money?" That was back when blogs were sort of a thing, and so I have huge respect for Jason. So like I've been tracking his trajectory, and what he did with Spend Matters has been phenomenal, and it served a real need. Of course, given our previous conversation, the question is where does it go from here? And I think that's as much a question as it is for Gartner and all the other analysts. So that's one thing. Second thing is I work for Kearney, so it's a little, I have to be delicate in how I I respond to this. However, so that's the second thing. I'll just caveat that what I'm about to say. So, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the firm here. Also, I need to caveat that I'm going to speak more broadly. But essentially, the question, and this is always a question for analysts, is where do you get your data? And because the Kearney did not provide data. In fact, actually, Spend Matters did a consulting whatever evaluation of all the procurement providers a few years ago, and Kearney declined to participate. So actually any numbers used in that article are actually not provided by Kearney, and they're also not accurate. So I think that's just also something to understand, is that that's not anyway, I'm just trying to be delicate here. The other thing that I would say is because Carney, the way we work, we don't like like we just blanket wise, we do not pay for any analyst or research. That's our going in proposition. If you want to work with us, because we have a long track record in this space, clients reach out to us all the time, and we have tons of repeat customers. So analysts, especially in the consulting market, don't do much. And in fact, professional services is a people business. So looking at an analyst report almost seems kind of, to me, counterintuitive, but that I'm of course biased on that. The other thing I would say though is that the headline there, suggests that is officio not, taking over the top spot in procurement, and that may or may not be true. From what I hear and know, that Officio is doing really well, and I applaud them. I think that's great, and there's room for everybody in the market. So I don't see it as a zero sum game, and and quite frankly, like, what are the criteria that we're evaluating? Because Carney's made, we bought a company called Procura. We have made investments in companies. We bought a company called Optano that does optimization. So, and then we're building out our whole set of procurement technology in addition to partnerships. And so we stand behind, well, again, I'm not speaking for Cardi. I would stand behind that, and that can speak for itself. And all of that's public knowledge. And then, quite frankly, our clients, choose us because they like working with us. And isn't that good enough? I don't know why we have to do some sort of analytical uh, model that sort of plots everybody on two dimensions, because that's not, to me, how professional services should work.
Well, and
I
it just
think,
made me, with my spidey senses and my experience working with analysts firms, when I saw this post, I read it twice and I immediately thought, this sounds very pay to play-ish. And I was wondering if one of the organizations has partnered with Spend Matters and paid money and the other hadn't. And that's why there was maybe some biased data or information in the post. So just why I wanted to call it out for all of us who are reading anything that's published by an analyst firm. Like, think about it, do some critical thinking. Don't just assume that everything in there is exactly true or is exactly as it reads.
yeah, and look, I mean, there's no way to know that, and that's not for us to decide. But I think what you highlighted there is an intense skepticism. I mean, I'm very skeptical, but also I think in general the market is very skeptical about these things. The other thing that like is these top 25 leaders in whatever, and I get like pinged all the time to be, featured in whatever magazine as a top supply chain leader, and what you find is that it costs, and I was alluding to this a moment ago, like we don't pay for these things. It'll cost you anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 to quote unquote be featured in these magazines, and you get a big printout and all of this stuff. And this is the funny thing is if you say, well, I don't have budget, what they'll do is they'll turn around and say, oh, you don't have to pay. And then they'll ask you, is there a tech company that will sponsor this? And then when you read then sort of once you're attuned to this, then when you see these things come out and you see somebody featured, very quickly you can see the inset of the company that funded it. And I think, again, like, what are we getting from that? Do we really need to know? We know who the leading CPOs or heads of supply chain are. So do we need a big feature spread that's really saying nothing about them? I don't know. I'm not convinced.
So when I was running go-to-market in-house at a firm, we had a client who was being featured in one of these magazines. And I think it was like their CPO or the top person within their organization was doing the feature. And what I found so interesting is that CPO or the head of supply chain had assigned somebody on his team to go out and sell ad space for him to cover the cost of his feature in the article. So we were one of their suppliers, and I actually got the email from someone on his team that said, "Hey, we value our partnership and relationship with you. Oh, by the way, we're being featured in this piece. Would you like to spend whatever it was, $5,000 or $10,000?" And I thought, wow, that is just, to me, completely biasing any sort of content or data that's coming out of these magazines when they are actually going and having their suppliers fund it and then feature their suppliers in these publications.
Yes, and it extends even further. And I don't know this, so this is a speculation, but when I read Harvard Business Review stuff or the World Economic Forum, I have to wonder how much these traditional models may or may not be, and I don't know that they are or they're not, but it makes me question even our traditional stalwart organizations. Are they taking money? And I think that becomes a question: is that pay to play? And that really becomes, I don't know. I'm concerned about that because then everything just, if everything's pay to play, then what are we doing?
Which goes back to my obsession with organic social channels like LinkedIn, where you can have founders producing what I think more genuine, authentic content on a day-to-day basis, talking about failures, customer stories. And am a big believer in organic content because I think, at least I feel like as a reader, I can tell and kind of weed out some of the pay to play versus not. And I feel like I can get some more meaningful information going to avenues like that versus the analyst information or these larger media publications.
Well, and I would add, like over time, my hope is that CPOs and their direct reports over time would become social media, more active on social media so that they can share their stories. Right now, a lot of them share their stories at big events like Digital Procurement World, and that's great. But I'd love to see it throughout the year on a more regular basis. And then I think that really changes the paradigm. And I don't think that's going to be the boomers or the Gen Xers that do that necessarily, but I do think as millennials and Gen Zs take these leadership positions, you're going to see more and more of this more active discussion of their journeys in more real time. Real time-ish. And by the way, this gets back to the point you're making on the organic. I agree. This gets back to that conference discussion. Like, so much better to host your own event than to try to like compete with 50 other companies on a expo floor at a conference that you're like, nobody really wants to go talk to you at the booth. But if you go to a destination conference, then that's actually, why you're going. You're going to really delve in deep on that tool. And so like that's why I think some of these paradigms have to shift.
Well, that's it for today. Tune in next Wednesday for another episode.